let's start with this issue of the guidance on sex and gender, to be precise. I spoke to Pat McFadden, the Welfare Secretary, this morning, and asked him about why it's taking so long. And he says that this guidance is so important that they can't afford to issue something that is not exactly right. He says they've only had it since September. And that's kind of reasonable, isn't it?
Dissembling. They've had it since April, the 8th of April to be exact. It's not only about sex and gender, it's an update on the 2011 code, which I think you probably wrote, which is way out of date, 14 years out of date, in 9 protected characteristics: disability, age, race, the whole gamut. They had the whole thing. We spent 2 years on it from 2022. They had the whole thing on the 8th of April, and they rightly responded.
Things have changed between 8th April and September, didn't they?
So the Supreme Court verdict was on 16th April, a few days after we gave it in to them. But they worked on it. They knew we were going to update 10%. 10% of 315 pages. That's all we needed to update in terms of the Supreme Court verdict. They responded on 30th June with several proposals, devolved administration saying this and that. Would you like to look again at this example or that example? Let me make it clear for your viewers. The guidance is just a navigational tool. The law of the land was determined on the 16th of April, nearly 8 months now. All the guidance does is say to a service provider that if you have a shopping centre in this part and you're offering these toilets, if you want to offer single-sex spaces, they must do X, and if you want to offer unisex spaces, they must do Y. It's a practical navigational tool. It is not the law.
But I don't spend too long on it, but Bridget Phillipson, I guess, would not be seen as a gender ideologist. I mean, she's known to support the Supreme Court ruling in principle. She appointed a successor to you that trans activists don't like because your successor actually supports the law as it is. Is it a bit unfair to say that she is running scared of backbenchers?
Well, Trevor, you've seen the same media reports and leaked documents that I've seen that refer to Cabinet Office ministers, people who would have worked under Pat McFadden, by the way, who do not deny that they're working with trans allies to delay the guidance, to prevent it being laid in Parliament, to change it, to water it down, I think are the words used. But you're right, we shouldn't spend too long on it because there's a difference of opinion.
But I think
I wondered if I could say something that is, I think, more important than going back and forth in a he said or she said. And that is this, that for service providers, and by the way, the guidance only affects a limited section of duty bearers, as they're called. Employment's guidance will come later for employers and so on. There's a whole series of things that will have to follow over years. For service providers and duty bearers, you're being let down by the government, but ignore that. Plus ça change. Things change, but some things don't change. It is ultimately your responsibility to comply with the law of the land. It's been 8 months that the law of the land has been clarified. So get on, get your legal advice and get on with it.
You also said, sorry.
And let me say, for trans people and women, who are the people I'm more concerned about in a way, because they're living in this kind of grey zone, if you feel that you're being discriminated against at the moment, while it's unclear how your employers or others should be, how your service providers should be offering services to you, then let me tell you that tribunals and courts are incorporating the law as it is refined right here and now, so assert your rights if you can, through your unions, through legal practitioners and so on.
You said in an interview with The Times that you thought the government had let down women. Why did you say that?
Well, it was on this most profound area where the Supreme Court said people deserving of dignity, the law, in acts that go back to 50, 60, 70 years, that privacy is your entitlement, upholding your dignity in the most intimate spaces is your entitlement. So one area is here. Grooming gangs, I think you just mentioned that in your introduction. You know, we have a situation, recently we discovered, that Sarah Sharif, that young girl who was so brutally murdered by her family, her father, we heard recently that the chance to prevent that murder was lost due to racial sensitivities. We know that it's mainly Labour-controlled councils, exposed by Andrew Norfolk at the Times, the late Andrew Norfolk, who didn't take the action they should have to prevent vulnerable young women because they were afraid of being called Islamophobic. And we have a situation now where the government has told us they're bringing in a new definition of Islamophobia that will be more speech curtailing, more speech chilling, and you will take one, at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, as you know, we're responsible for religion and belief. We are the regulator of religion and belief, discrimination. They're going to bring in yet another area where, for example, anyone who's defending women's rights is going to be accused by those ethnic minority men of Islamophobia if they dare say something about how Muslim women are suppressed. I'm a Muslim woman myself. I know all about this. I know the community.
It's quite a serious thing to say that the government is allowing practices or neglect or omissions that lead to the outcome that we saw on Sarah Sharif. It's quite a serious thing to point the finger at ministers about.
Yes, and I didn't see any ministers. It is incredibly serious. The murder of a child in those brutal conditions is pretty serious. What's happened to young girls in our northern towns, well, look at London, or is happening here, resisted by the mayor. These are fairly serious things, Trevor. Are women's lives, women's dignity not worth a serious discussion? And let me say one other thing. It is, a lot of people describe my defense of free speech or my defense of certain rights as, oh, these are culture wars. No, you can't disregard 51% of the population on the basis of a bit of a culture war. These are profound, foundational and fundamental rights. And it is serious. And I don't believe this government is taking it seriously. I can give you another example. If you want to talk about the jobs of part-time women, more vulnerable women that may well be lost due to the advance of AI, there doesn't seem to be any strategy to deal with that. You have a government that is, these are precarious jobs. They're jobs mainly done by women, in women who need more flexible working, who have other responsibilities, childcare and so on. You have government increasing minimum wage, slapping national insurance contributions onto employers and so on, where employers think if the cost of employment becomes so high, why don't I move to automation? So a strategy to deal with that would be helpful. If
the cabinet minister was sitting here, he or she would say, this is quite a broadside against the government that delivered the 2010 Equality Act, which is the act that, well, I for a little while, but you for the whole of your term, were mandated to implement.
Profoundly important piece of legislation. A profoundly important piece of legislation.
Are you saying that you think that the Labour Party that brought in that legislation has somehow lost its way?
Yes. And I think particularly the unexpected gains in the last election resulted in a lot of people who came from certain sectors, the NGO sector, advocacy sectors and so on, who really didn't get the time to bed in terms of what being a legislator is about. We did, on the Code of Practice, we did parliamentary briefings with MPs. So we, in that sense, I can tell you, my heart sank. They didn't have an idea of the Equality Act at all.
You use quite strong terms in a newspaper interview. You talked about Labour abandoning women and Labour no longer being the party of equality. Do you really believe that?
I hope not. I hope that they don't abandon women, because then we're in a really dark place. I'm hoping that by speaking out now, that the women in the Labour Party will sit up and take note and realise that the foundational principles of many of the rights that I'm talking about are meaningful, and they will fight for them.
The Prime Minister, again, if he were in studio, would say you're aiming at the wrong target. I don't think you've spoken publicly on the issue of Nigel Farage's alleged behaviour as a schoolboy. Isn't that a bigger problem than the Labour Party?
Look, this is a situation I feel actually quite confused and disturbed by. You have a situation where, when you read these allegations in terms of what is attributed to him, it looks utterly ghastly on paper. And then you try and contextualise it, and you think, this is perhaps 50 years ago. You know, young people say all sorts of things at school. When you're teenagers, you say and do all sorts of things. And I think it's worth, perhaps, while condemning what he's done, to reflect on one thing that confuses me.
We have to insert the word allegedly.
Yes, allegedly done. But the one thing that slightly confuses me about him, and I hear his contextualisation of it all, is why can't he just offer an unreserved apology for any distress caused? I just don't get it. It seems to me that would be the most genuine thing to say if he's genuinely not a racist.
Just very quickly, we could, of course, you and I could talk about this forever. 30 seconds. You're leaving this job, and I think one of your concerns is state of integration.
Yes. I mean, I referred to that in my newspaper interview. I'm deeply concerned about, because we have very large numbers of people, newcomers, arriving here, much larger than in the time that you and I have been involved in these matters. And we have an approach in the United Kingdom, a long-standing approach, which is very different to continental Europe, France, Italy, Germany, of allowing people to live within their communities, to be completely autonomous, friends and relatives, and never know what's happening around them. And we don't seem to have some civic virtues, some social mores and norms that we can say, this is the social contract, let's all sign up to it, you've come here, welcome, but this is what we're about.